2-to-1 macro.
Oh.
Right? So it's not like we think of macro lenses as macro is defined as 1-to-1. So the size of your subject is the same size as the image that's being projected onto your sensor. That's what we think of as 1-to-1. That's true macro. Why stop there was the question he asked, right? Why not go to a 2x? And so he had this lens design that would go to a 2x, and worked with a few different people to form the company. He's originally from Hefei in central China. He'd been living in Japan at that time, and still lives in Japan, but was able to found the company in his hometown in central China. So the 60 millimeter lens was the start of things, and then made a 15 millimeter macro lens, so an ultra wide lens, full frame coverage, that will do a 1-to-1 macro. So it doesn't go all the way down into that 2-to-1, but it's an ultra wide field of view. So 15 millimeter that still lets you focus down to a 1-to-1 magnification.
So, real quick, Steven, about kind of the 1-to-1, like what kind of look does that provide? Like, for some of our maybe like non-macro photographers in the audience, like what kind of look does 1-to-1 provide, or even further than that?
So it's close up, right? It is. Think about, right, if you're looking at something and you get really, really close to it just with your eye, right? You're looking right on top of something, and so then you can then magnify and blow up the image. So if I've got the example that I use is a penny, right? So if I take a picture of a penny, it's going to just about fill the sensor on my camera, right, from top to bottom. A penny is 18. I think, no. What's the measurement of a penny? I think it's 18 millimeters.
Yeah, I think
and then the size of
there.
the sensor on a full frame camera is 24 by 36 millimeters. So if you were to take a picture of a penny at a 1-to-1 magnification, the penny is going to be roughly fill the frame from top to bottom. You're going to have a couple millimeters on the top or on the bottom, but then you can take that picture and blow it up to whatever size you normally would, right? If I'm making an 8x10, I'm blowing a penny up, and I'm making a print of it as an 8x10, and it's filling the frame almost. So that's at a 1-to-1. When I go down to a 2-to-1 magnification, I'm magnifying in and getting even closer, and now I'm on the same. We're looking at a penny here. I think we'll actually throw some slides up. Some slides up to show an image of a penny shot at a 2-to-1 magnification to see, because not only does the penny fill the frame vertically, but the penny actually fills the frame from side to side at a 2-to-1 magnification. Right, so 36 millimeter, right? If we think of a 36 millimeter is the horizontal measurement of your full frame sensor, 35 millimeter sensor. 18 millimeters is the diameter of the penny. If we shoot it at a 2-to-1 magnification, the penny ends up filling the frame from side to side, and you end up cropping off the top and the bottom of the penny. So we're talking about close up. We're talking about being right on top of your subject, or filling the frame with a subject, being right, very, very, very close, taking pictures of small subjects and still having the camera focus in on them.
Wow. That's awesome. You enlightened me there. I had no idea that the 1-to-1 was like more in relation to your sensor rather than the lens. So thanks for that knowledge.
So it's not in relation to the sensor, right? So if we're shooting with a micro 4/3 camera, and we're shooting with at a 1-to-1 magnification, the penny is going to more than fill the frame, right? Because the size of the penny in real life never changes. So that 1-to-1, that's the ratio of the size of the penny in real life to the size of the penny in projected onto the sensor. So
Okay.
if we're using a smaller sensor, we're just cropping in down on the penny. So if we take a picture of a penny in a micro four thirds sensor, we're just cropping down in on it a little bit closer and a little bit tighter. So for macro photography, there are a lot of photographers out there that will use APS-C cameras or micro four thirds cameras because you're getting, yeah, the image ends up filling more of the
Mm-hmm.
frame.
Yeah, more pixels on the
Um,
subject, essentially.
yeah, right, because
Yeah.
we're just cropping down, but the 1-to-1 ratio stays the same. So we're yeah, you're just cropping down in tighter on the subject. Uh, yeah, and so uh, yeah, so for yeah, so I think we got there and looping back into the continuation. So the Laowa has started making at this point we've got the 60 millimeter 2-to-1 macro, the 15 millimeter 1-to-1 macro, and so why start with macro? So all of the Laowa lenses are manual focus. Everything we make at this point is a manual focus lens. When you're shooting macro, most of the time you're going to switch the camera into manual focus anyways, right? When you're dealing with those really close subject distances, um, there's a couple of things happen and a couple of things change. Nothing changes, but um, there are some challenges that come together, and physics starts to become a challenge. Um, right when we think of depth of field, we have three different things in photography that will affect depth of field. The first one, right, is the one that we learn first, and one of the like when you first learn aperture and understanding of its control over depth of field. I think that is a very enlightening point for people in their photography is when you first start to understand, oh, okay, I have this control over how much light is getting into the camera that also controls how much of the image is in focus, right? So that's our first control over first thing that controls depth of field is the aperture, the lens opening. But also what controls depth of field or affects depth of field is the focal length of our lens, right? So a longer focal length lens will have a shallower depth of field, and also the distance to the subject affects our depth of field. So when we get to a smaller and smaller distance away from the subject, the depth of field gets shallower and shallower. And so when we're dealing with shooting in these, shooting at 1-to-1 or going beyond it, uh, the depth of field we're talking about millimeters, and on some of the lenses we're talking a depth of field that is less than a millimeter. So like just sort of uh, like a thin slice, a thin plane going through the image that's actually sharp and in focus. So yeah, they're trying to use an autofocus system to get that focus point exactly where you want it. Um, Autofocus and certainly mirrorless autofocus has improved significantly. I think that's one of the areas the megapixel race ended years ago. The high ISO um, low light sensitivity race is still on, but I think we're getting to a little bit of a point of diminishing returns. At this point, I think what autofocus is one of the areas that has seen some of the most improvements in the last 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And looking at the newest tier, the newest round of mirrorless cameras from pretty much all of the manufacturers, it's really cool to see what they're all doing.